just like to say a particular welcome to friends and family, our new fellows, and to our existing fellows and all the staff. I'm delighted to see so many people here. I'm just going to take a moment to pay particular tribute to Russell Crandon, who's the fellowship manager, who many of you will have interacted with and who's run the whole process seamlessly, as always. So it gives me great pleasure to initiate this fellowship mission ceremony by starting to read the citations and to invite the President and Professor Stewart to the stage in order to arrange handing over the nicely signed scrolls and also for the fellows to sign the book. So without further ado, I'd like to call on Professor Colin Bagent. Professor Bagent is Director of the MRC Population Health Research Unit at Oxford and is internationally recognised for his expertise in clinical trial design, governance, interpretation of evidence, and in data synthesis. He was the first to establish the intellectual and operational infrastructure for large-scale randomized trials in chronic kidney disease, and his 9,000-patient SHARP trial changed all the major lipid and renal guidelines internationally. As an MRC director, Professor Bagent has championed many areas of population health science that are pivotal to exploring disease etiology and has trained research leaders from a range of disciplines to address this challenge. Professor Colin Bagent. Professor Wendy Barclay. Wendy Barclay is Action Medical Research Professor of Virology at Imperial College London. Her research career has been directed towards identifying molecular mechanisms of influenza host restriction and developing effective experimental systems for studying this key priority of the virus. Her leading role in virology has resulted in her expertise being widely sought on advisory boards, including those of the Roslin and Pirbright Institutes, the UK New and Emerging Respiratory Virus Threats Panel, and the DEFRA Exotic Disease Group. She has recently completed her 3-year term as the first woman to lead the Microbiology Society Virus Group. Professor Wendy Barclay. Professor Maria Belvissi. Maria Belvissi is Senior Vice President and Head of Research and Early Development at AstraZeneca and is among the world's most talented and productive pharmacologists in the field of respiratory medicine. Her highly influential research has focused on the cellular and molecular mechanisms of asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and chronic cough. Her transformative contributions to understanding neurobiology of the lung have provided unique mechanistic insights into understanding the cough reflex and demonstrated the existence of distinct neurophenotypes which drive cough across patients with different chronic lung diseases. Professor Maria Belvissi. Professor Judith Brewer. Judith Brewer, Professor of Virology at University College London, is an outstanding clinical virologist. As chair of the varicella zoster and papillomavirus vaccine subcommittees, she has achieved the introduction of 3 vaccination programs that are likely to eliminate HPV cancers in the UK and massively reduce cases of shingles. Brewer was the first to develop genomic methods, now widely used, for sequencing hard-to-culture pathogens directly from clinical material, pioneering their use for investigating transmission and the action of new antiviral drugs. Her studies on norovirus, the major global cause of gastroenteritis, has led to new theories about how norovirus pandemics arise and that are likely to influence surveillance and vaccine design. Professor Judith Brewer. Professor Christopher Breitling. Chris Breitling is Professor of Respiratory Medicine at the University of Leicester and Chair of the NIHR Respiratory Translational Research Collaboration. He has pioneered the development of biomarkers to phenotype airways disease, translated mechanistic insights into clinical trials, and implemented these findings into clinical practice. He was the first to demonstrate the clinical utility of measuring airway inflammation in the management of asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and to identify non-asthmatic eosinophilic bronchitis as a common cause of chronic cough. His research has impacted upon international clinical guidelines, and he has supported the career progression of his clinical fellows into senior academic posts. Professor Christopher Breitling. Dr. James Briscoe. James Briscoe, a senior group leader at the Francis Crick Institute, is a leading developmental biologist whose studies of fundamental mechanisms of neural stem cell differentiation have underpinned the development of novel therapeutic strategies. His work combines scholarly knowledge of embryology with interdisciplinary approaches that incorporate molecular and cellular biology, mathematical modeling, and systems biology. Dr. Briscoe has continued to apply new technology and interdisciplinary approaches to long-standing problems in developmental biology. By combining systematic genomic studies with data-driven theoretical approaches, his recent work is providing new mechanistic understanding and revealing the underlying logic of transcriptional networks. Dr. James Briscoe. Professor Robert Bristow. Robert Bristow is director of the Manchester Cancer Research Centre. A leading clinician scientist and world expert in prostate cancer, he champions translational science, combining innovative laboratory research on the tumour microenvironment with deep clinical understanding. To distinguish which men diagnosed with prostate cancer are at high risk of cancer recurrence after treatment, he led an international team that developed a genetic test that can identify patients who need more aggressive treatments. Crucially, this test provides better options for personalized therapy in high-risk prostate cancer patients while avoiding overtreatment for patients with less aggressive disease. Professor Robert Bristow. Professor Robert Brownstone. Robert Brownstone is Professor of Neurosurgery at UCL and is a highly accomplished neurosurgeon. He has made major contributions to the field of spinal cord developmental physiology using advanced techniques in mouse models to identify and characterize neural circuits for movement. His preclinical work has demonstrated that the transplantation of embryonic stem cell-derived motor neurons into peripheral nerves can lead to functional muscle reinnervation. His combined stem cell and clinical expertise has also led him to highlight ethical issues to be addressed when moving from animal studies to first-in-human studies for spinal cord injury. Professor Robert Brownstone. Professor Julia Buckingham. Professor Julia Buckingham, Vice-Chancellor and President of Brunel University, is an acknowledged world expert on the neuroendocrine mechanisms that control the hypothalamic pituitary adrenocortical response to stress. Her work has elucidated the mechanisms by which factors such as drugs, gender, age, and the challenges of the host defense system influence these key control mechanisms. She both established and led one of the 4 UK centres jointly funded by BBSRC, MRC, and the pharmaceutical industry that set out to revitalise research and training in vivo physiology and pharmacology. She has been, and continues to be, a major contributor to major international committees that influence biomedical research funding and direction. Professor Julia Buckingham. Professor Edward Byrne. Ed Byrne is President and Principal at King's College London. He has had 2 careers, one in clinical academia and the other in health and university leadership. He led research that opened up the mitochondrial pathology field, unraveling the significance of variation of the mitochondrial genome in neurodegeneration. He played a key role in the establishment of the Crick Institute and served as Vice-Chancellor of Monash University, consolidating its position as one of the world's top medical research universities. He is a Life Fellow of the Australian Academy of Health and Medical Science, which he helped found, and has received Australia's highest civilian honours. Professor Edward Byrne. Professor Sarah Cleveland. Sarah Cleveland is Professor of Comparative Epidemiology at the University of Glasgow and is considered an international leader in One Health research. By pioneering new approaches to estimating the human rabies burden, she has shown that there is a 100-fold underreporting of cases in Africa. Her research showed that canine rabies can be eliminated through vaccination of 70% of dogs, and that this is feasible across Asia and Africa, even in wildlife-rich areas. Throughout her career, Professor Cleveland has demonstrated a zeal for combining high-quality science with translational impact to improve the health and well-being of people in impoverished and neglected communities. Professor Sarah Cleveland. Professor Ari Kumarasamy. Ari Kumarasamy is Director of the National Centre for Miscarriage Research at the University of Birmingham, where he runs a large and highly influential programme of research, predominantly in the clinical trials arena. His 2 definitive world-leading clinical trials, Promise and Trophy, have put an end to years of non-evidence-based practice and are changing national and international guidelines. Effective research in global health has included the use of women and children's group participation in promoting maternal and newborn health, and studies addressing emergency maternal transport to healthcare facilities, the outputs of both of which have been included in World Health Organization guidelines. Professor Ari Kumrasamy. Professor Tim Dalgleish. Tim Dalgleish, Program Lead of the Cognition, Emotion and Mental Health Group at the MRC Cognition and Brain Sciences Unit, is a world-leading cognitive neuroscientist and clinical psychologist. His focus is on one of the most significant medical challenges of modern times, namely enhancing the understanding and treatment of mood, anxiety, and stress disorders in children, young people, and adults. His work has contributed to new NICE guidance for the prevention of adult depression, for collaborative care for treatment-resistant depression, and on the use of cognitive therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder in women and young people. Professor Tim Dalgleish. Professor Sarah Darby. Sarah Darby is Professor of Medical Statistics at the University of Oxford. Her work has had major impacts in 3 areas: radiological protection, diagnostic CT scans, and cancer therapy. Notably, she showed that radiation-related risks usually multiply underlying risks rather than adding to them, and that they last much longer than previously realized. Her work has been cited frequently by the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation and is referenced in the main national and international breast cancer guidelines in the UK, the US, and Europe. Importantly, it has informed radiotherapy practice worldwide. Professor Sarah Darby. Dr. Jennifer Dixon. Jennifer Dixon, Chief Executive of the Health Foundation, is an international leader in health policy. She is well known for advising government and national policymakers and for her singular contributions to developing policy based on data analytics. Her pioneering work on predictive risk led to the introduction of algorithms to better identify patients at risk of future unplanned hospitalization. Her analysis of key national policies such as rationing, GP fund holding, patient choice, regulatory approaches, and chronic care management all led to national initiatives. Under her leadership, the Health Foundation has revolutionized its contributions with respect to policy, research economics, and science to promote healthy lives for all. Dr. Jennifer Dixon. Professor Tim Eisen. Tim Eisen is Vice President and Head of Oncology Translational Medicine at AstraZeneca and is one of the world's leading clinical figures in the field of cancer therapy. He was among the first to establish the role of the kinase inhibitor, sorafenib, in renal cancer and played a key role in building a department with a particular focus on developmental therapeutics when at Cambridge. At AstraZeneca, Tim has played a key role as Vice President with substantial global responsibility for early phase clinical trials, and he is now uniquely well placed to pursue his findings as therapeutic targets within AstraZeneca. Professor Tim Eisen. Professor Michael Hanna. Michael Hanna is an internationally recognized academic neurologist with expertise in neuromuscular diseases, especially channelopathies, mitochondrial diseases, and degenerative myopathies. He demonstrated exceptional visionary science leadership in establishing the MRC Center for Translational Research in Neuromuscular Diseases at UCL. This centre has transformed the UK landscape by establishing national platforms for experimental medicine, including stratified patient cohorts, a human muscle biobank, and new MRI biomarkers that have been adopted internationally. He recently set up an international centre for genomic medicine in neuromuscular diseases that includes an innovative lower and middle-income country fellowship programme and genetic research across 5 continents. Professor Michael Hanna. Professor Harry Hemingway. Harry Hemingway is Professor of Clinical Epidemiology at UCL. He has made a standout contribution in catalyzing the use of informatics and data science to exploit large-scale health record resources, including the generation of new knowledge on the prevention, causes, and treatment of cardiovascular disease. His leadership in establishing and growing the National Institute of Data Science for Health, Health Data Research UK, delivered a science vision supported by strong governance. His research group exploits large-scale health records using methods at the interface of epidemiology, biomedical informatics, and big data, and informs clinical practice guidelines and policy affecting the health of millions of people. Professor Harry Hemingway. Professor Mary Herbert. Mary Herbert, Professor of Reproductive Biology at Newcastle University, combines her world-class basic biology with clinical research that it is the forefront treatment of inherited mitochondrial disease. Her understanding of the process of meiotic maturation in oocytes, coupled with her development of methodologies for oocyte manipulation, has been essential for the development of the first UK programme of replacement therapies for inherited mitochondrial disease, often referred to as 3-person IVF. Herbert's skills in outreach and communication have played a significant part in persuading government to change legislation to bring this technology under regulation in the UK for the benefit of patients. Professor Mary Herbert. Dr. Caroline Hill. Caroline Hill is a senior group leader at the Francis Crick Institute and is a world leader in the TGF-beta signaling field. Her work has had a huge impact on our understanding of how cell communication, through signal transduction, drives diverse developmental and disease processes. Her work has strongly influenced current thinking about how deregulated TGF-beta family signaling leads to cancer, fibrosis, and the Marfan-related syndromes. She has recently demonstrated the critical importance of spatiotemporal TGF-beta signaling during embryonic development, and insights from this work have led her to a major translational endeavor developing new therapies for pancreatic cancer. Dr. Caroline Hill. Professor Dame Susan Hill. Susan Hill is Chief Scientific Officer for NHS England, where she plays a lead role in articulating the importance of science in health, providing professional leadership and expert advice across the whole health and care system. She has led major system and workforce transformation to improve patient outcomes and service effectiveness in the NHS and beyond. Significantly, she played a major role in developing the NHS workforce by devising and leading delivery of the Modernising Scientific Careers programme, providing for the first time a single integrated career framework, training programmes, curricula, and delivery infrastructure for the over 50 specialisms of healthcare science. Professor Dame Susan Hill. Professor Judy Hurst. Judy Hurst, Professor of Biological Chemistry at the MRC Mitochondrial Biology Unit, Cambridge, has had a key role in every advance towards understanding of the highly complex mechanisms of complex 1 catalysis. Developing new physical and biochemical methods to address the elusive coupling mechanism between redox reaction and proton translocation. She established the mechanism of complex 1 inhibition by the anti-diabetic drug metformin and has used kinetic and thermodynamic strategies to define how superoxide production by complex 1 responds to the intermitochondrial NADH-NAD+ ratio to directly link two pathological effects of complex 1 dysfunction. This seminal work has brought understanding that is fundamental to critical issues of health and disease on a global scale. Professor Judy Hurst. Professor Gideon Lack. Gideon Lack is Professor of Paediatric Allergy at King's College London. His research has revolutionized the field of food allergy and brought about major changes in public health policy. He has challenged the conventional wisdom that the avoidance of foods in early infancy will prevent the development of food allergies. He has conclusively demonstrated that hundreds of thousands of new cases of peanut allergy worldwide can be prevented through early consumption of peanut in infants with eczema. This work has resulted in the transformation of guidelines for 16 national committees and led to new National Institutes of Health guidelines on infant feeding. Professor Gideon Lack. Professor Matthew Lambon-Ralph. Matthew Lambon-Ralph is the director of the MRC Cognition and Brain Sciences Unit, Cambridge, an appointment reflecting the high regard in which he is held in the academic medical field in the UK. His field of academic research is the organisation of somatic memory and language in the human brain, of which there are four main approaches. Professor Ralph is a world leader in all. He is currently chair of the stakeholder board for the EU Human Brain Project and a member of, or advisor to, a number of important national groups in the UK. Professor Matthew Lambon-Ralph. Professor Jonathan Lederman. Jonathan Lederman, Clinical Director of the UCL Cancer Institute, has demonstrated outstanding research leadership in gynecological cancer clinical trials. His achievements in developing PARP inhibitor drugs to treat ovarian cancer has fundamentally changed global clinical practice for patients with this disease. Professor Lederman is the first director of the Clinical Trials Unit at UCL, and through his outstanding leadership, his unit has grown from a small group to one of the largest in the country with an international reputation for research excellence and governance. His commitment to this work has changed the standard of care in ovarian cancer and enabled others to do the same. Professor Jonathan Lederman. Professor Claire Lloyd. Claire Lloyd is Professor of Respiratory Immunology at Imperial College London. She has made a series of seminal discoveries that fundamentally change our understanding of the pulmonary immune response to allergens in a career that has spanned academia and industry. Her novel insights into early life pulmonary immunity led to a strategic award to investigate immune development and molecular mechanisms underlying wheeze in babies and young children. She has taken significant leadership roles, holds key editorial positions on several journals, and is a council member of the International Society for Mucosal Immunology. She has recently established a Francis Crick Institute satellite attachment, one of only 8 from Imperial College. Professor Claire Lloyd. Professor Christopher Mason. Christopher Mason, Chief Scientific Officer at AvroBio, is internationally recognized as a leading figure in cell and gene therapy science and translation. AvroBio, a gene therapy company founded by Professor Mason, is one of the leading ex vivo gene therapy companies. Professor Mason has spent his academic and commercial career championing the scientific and commercial translation of cell and gene therapies through a combination of his research leadership when at UCL, charitable work supporting the funding of world-class science, influencing UK government on its science policy, facilitating collaborations with industry, and enabling the engagement of all stakeholders, including, and most importantly, the patients and public. Professor Christopher Mason. Professor Helen McShane. Helen McShane, Professor of Vaccinology at the University of Oxford, is a clinical academic who has made pioneering contributions to translational research through her world-leading TB vaccine program. She leads a strong preclinical and clinical research team in Oxford and works with collaborating sites throughout the UK, in the Gambia, Senegal, Uganda, and South Africa. Her standing in the TB vaccine field is illustrated by her strong collaborations with many groups in Europe and the USA. She chairs the European Tuberculosis Vaccine Initiative Advisory Committee and is a member of 2 WHO working groups on BCG and new TB vaccines. Professor Helen McShane. Professor Andreas Melzer. Andreas Melzer is Professor of Medical Technology at the University of Dundee. He has led technological research for minimal access surgery, including the design, development, and experimental validation of various instruments. His skill sets combine, in a unique manner, technical engineering skills with clinical knowledge. He was the founding director of the newly established Institute for Medical Science and Technology, promoting R&D at the interface of life and physical sciences. The paradigm established by Professor Melzer at IMSAT focused on synergistic programs of translational research by multidisciplinary groups and was the first of its kind in the UK. Professor Andreas Melzer. Professor Irene Miguel Aliaga. Irene Miguel Aliaga is Professor of Genetics and Physiology at Imperial College London. Her pioneering work with model organisms such as Drosophila has transformed our understanding of how organs communicate and also the importance of the gut-brain axis for regulating metabolism. Her insights on gut-brain communication have had huge implications for the treatment and prevention of metabolic illnesses such as diabetes and obesity. Her findings are important from a medical perspective as they may help to explain why diseases such as cancer are more common in women than men and why men and women respond very differently to treatments. Professor Irene Miguel Aliaga. Professor Ashley Moffat. Ashley Moffat is Professor of Reproductive Immunology at the University of Cambridge and is the foremost international authority on the immunology of human reproduction. She is distinguished for a sustained program of research that has defined the role of the innate immune system in placentation. This has transformed our understanding of normal and abnormal pregnancy, particularly of disorders such as preeclampsia. Significantly, Professor Moffat's genetic studies explain high rates of preeclampsia and maternal morbidity in Ugandan populations. She has taught and influenced generations of medical students, trained young British and African physicians, and educated the world about the importance of understanding the scientific basis of human reproduction. Professor Ashley Moffat. Professor Gavin Perkins. Gavin Perkins, Professor in Critical Care Medicine at the University of Warwick, is widely recognised as an international leader in emergency care. His landmark trials on pre-hospital care have been credited with delivering a substantial beneficial change in healthcare. The sudden and unexpected onset of illness and urgent need for life-saving treatments in patients who often lack mental capacity makes his program of research uniquely challenging. Working across multi-professional boundaries, he has developed research capability and capacity within ambulance services. His leadership of the International Liaison Committee on Resuscitation provides better understanding of medical science and is accelerating improvements in practice worldwide. Professor Gavin Perkins. Professor John Radford. John Radford is Professor of Medical Oncology at the University of Manchester. He is widely recognised as being at the forefront of patient-orientated research in lymphatic cancer through a series of important practice-changing studies and innovations. He has made a major contribution to the field of post-treatment surveillance and management of late toxicity. He modelled long-term follow-up in the ADAPT project, funded by NHS commissioners, and designs and leads the breast screening after radiotherapy dataset project, BARD. This was described by the National Screening Director as a model for the surveillance of clinically identified high-risk populations. Professor John Radford. Professor Anne-Marie Rafferty. Anne-Marie Rafferty is Professor of Nursing Policy at King's College London and is an internationally recognised expert in healthcare workforce research. The first nurse to gain a doctorate from Oxford University, her research has reframed the way we think about nursing and the state. Her research into the healthcare workforce was the first to establish the link between nurse staffing and patient mortality rates in the UK. The policy reach and significance of her research has impacted on numerous government initiatives, both in the UK and abroad. Notably, her design of the Culture of Care Barometer is being adopted by the Hospital Outcomes Research Network in Europe. Professor Anne-Marie Rafferty. Dr. Felix Randall. Felix Randall, a group leader at the MRC Laboratory of Molecular Biology in Cambridge, is an outstanding molecular immunologist. He has made major contributions to our understanding of human immunity by revealing novel principles of cell-autonomous defense. Guided by the importance of cell-autonomous immunity as the sole defender of unicellular organisms, he investigates the ability of individual human cells to defend themselves against infection. This work has provided important insights into the mechanism of antibacterial autophagy. Combined with the first molecularly defined examples of how viruses subvert autophagy, his studies support development of autophagy as a drug target. Dr. Felix Randall. Professor Daniel Ruckert. Daniel Ruckert, Professor of Visual Information Processing at Imperial College London, has made a fundamental contribution to medical imaging. His technique for image registration using non-rigid deformation models was a key step in the rapid advance of imaging over the last 2 decades. This was one of the first effective methods successfully used in multiple anatomies, notably the brain, breast, heart, and abdomen. His work is used in many fields, stretching from the fetus in utero to Alzheimer's disease research and clinical trials. He is now developing artificial intelligence methods for imaging, which will have a major impact in years to come. Professor Daniel Ruckert. Professor Alison Simmons. Alison Simmons is Professor of Gastroenterology at the University of Oxford, where her work has provided fundamental new insights into inflammatory bowel disease pathogenesis. She has redefined the cellular map of the intestine, discovering unexpected heterogeneity and hitherto unknown cell types. She charted the basis of mucosal remodeling that fuels inflammation in colitis, defining populations of disease-associated cells and highlighting new pathways impairing mucosal healing. She has made outstanding contributions to defining the function of the strongest IBD susceptibility genes described in the basis for their dysfunction in Crohn's. Her work has provided the rationale for innovative treatments and diagnostic tools. Professor Alison Simmons. Professor the Lord Trees. Sandy Trees, a working peer in the House of Lords, has made major contributions to both veterinary and tropical disease research and is hugely respected for his work in the veterinary profession and politics. He has held distinguished national and international leadership roles throughout his career, including President of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons and Vice President of the European College of Veterinary Parasitology. Since his appointment to the House of Lords, he has served on the EU Select Committee and its Energy and Environment Subcommittee, and is co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on animal welfare. Professor the Lord Trees. Professor Andrew Tutt. Andrew Tutt is director of the Breast Cancer Now Research Centre at the Institute of Cancer Research. He is distinguished for seminal contributions to developing new therapies targeting aberrant DNA damage responses in breast and ovarian cancers. By combining his clinical experience with strong expertise in basic cancer biology, he has bridged the interface between these disciplines and driven rapid translation of fundamental discoveries. His scientific, clinical, and communication skills, strategic leadership, and relentless energy to explain and translate basic science for patient benefit have made him a highly valued colleague in the international guideline consensus and research steering groups. Professor Andrew Tutt. Professor Sarah Walker. Sarah Walker is Professor of Medical Statistics and Epidemiology at both the University of Oxford and the University College London. Sarah has designed complex, innovative trials to successfully and efficiently answer multiple clinically relevant questions and hence change policy. She has been at the forefront of identifying how pathogen whole genome sequencing can be used to improve antimicrobial prescribing decisions by enhancing microbiology workflows in the NHS, ensuring much more efficient identification of infecting pathogens and the use of electronic health records. Her leadership of projects in health economics and complex behavioral change interventions illustrates her skills in tackling the full spectrum of the infectious disease challenge. Professor Sarah Walker. Professor Nicholas Wareham. Nick Wareham is Director of the MRC Epidemiology Unit at the University of Cambridge. He has made important discoveries concerning the genetic, developmental, and behavioral determinants of type 2 diabetes. He has provided extensive insight into the determinants of dietary intake and physical activity behaviors and their association with chronic disease outcomes. His work has provided reliable estimates of the potential effectiveness of population-wide interventions, such as increasing physical activity and reducing the consumption of fast food and sugar-sweetened beverages. His contributions have directly informed public health strategies and have enormous potential to ameliorate the rising tide of type 2 diabetes. Professor Nicholas Wareham. Professor Graham Williams. Graham Williams is Professor of Endocrinology at Imperial College London. He has developed a multidisciplinary approach in mouse genetics, imaging, and molecular cell biology to establish cutting-edge methodology in functional genomics and skeletal phenotype analysis. His pioneering research has changed clinical practice by underpinning the latest international guidelines that now focus long-term management to limit the detrimental skeletal consequences of thyroid hormone excess in millions of thyroid cancer survivors worldwide. As president of the UK Society for Endocrinology, he's been an influential leader, making seminal contributions to the national strategic development, advocacy, and governance of endocrinology. Professor Graham Williams. So that completes the fellows who were elected during the 2019 cycle who were able to join us today. It now just falls to me to read the names of those not able to attend, but who we hope might come and join with us next year. And they are Professor Philippa Bejon, Dr. Peter Campbell, Professor Benjamin Davis, Professor Richard Lilford, Professor Michael Murphy, Professor Richard Price, and Professor Rodrigo Quanquiora. I'm now going to proceed to read the citations for individuals elected in the 2018 cycle who I'm very pleased are joining us today, having been unable to attend last year. Professor Melanie Davis. Melanie Davis, Professor of Diabetes Medicine at the University of Leicester, is one of the top 10 global diabetes experts. Her work has significantly impacted clinical care, including the international clinical guidelines, notably in the use of insulin and GLP-1 therapy. The diabetes risk score developed by her team has been implemented in collaboration with Diabetes UK and is recommended by Public Health England. Professor Davies led the largest collaborative RCT in diabetes education self-management, and this programme has been adopted by 50% of UK primary care organisations and is now being rolled out in Holland, Australia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Middle East. Professor Melanie Davies. Professor John Edmonds. Professor John Edmonds is Dean of the Faculty of Epidemiology and Population Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He is a world authority on mathematical modelling of the spread of infectious diseases and the design of efficient control programs to inform public health decision-making. He has published a number of paradigm-shifting papers describing better mathematical models of the spread of close contact infections and the use of dynamic models in economic evaluations of infectious disease control programs. Professor Edmonds is an influential advisor on immunization programs nationally and at the World Health Organization. Professor John Edmonds. Professor Simon Griffin. Simon Griffin is Professor of General Practice at the University of Cambridge and a group leader at the MRC Epidemiology Unit. He is one of the leading academic general practitioners of his generation, contributing to substantive advances in the prevention, detection, and management of non-communicable diseases by translating epidemiological knowledge into preventative action. Professor Griffin published the first diabetes risk score, derivatives of which are used in screening prevention programs worldwide, and has contributed the majority of original data referred to in international guidelines confirming screening. An active GP, Professor Griffin is also an exceptional teacher. Professor Simon Griffin. Professor Ian Hall. Ian Hall is Director of the Centre for Biomedical Sciences at the University of Nottingham. He has, over 30 years of research, concentrated on defining the genetic basis of airway disease. He published a series of important papers describing genetic influences on lung function, COPD, and asthma. He is the co-chair of 2 international research consortia, Spirometer and UK BiLeave, the latter overseeing the first major genotyping study to use the UK Biobank resource. He contributes to the wider work of the health community through his contribution to the Prescribing Safety Assessment Executive Group, overseeing delivery of PSA into medical schools in the UK. Professor Ian Hall. Professor Elaine Holmes. Elaine Holmes is the Professor of Chemical Biology at Imperial College London. Her research focuses on development of metabolic biomarkers of disease in personalised healthcare and population studies with significant contributions to cardiovascular, neuroscience, and infectious disease research. She has pioneered development and implementation of mathematical modeling methods to integrate genotypic and phenotypic data that has significantly improved mechanistic understanding of disease. The analytical framework she conceptualized has opened new research avenues, including the application of metabolic profiling technologies to systems biology and development of methods for assessing the role of the microbiome in health and disease. Professor Elaine Holmes. Professor Timothy Layton. Timothy Layton, Professor of Ultrasonics and Underwater Acoustics at the University of Southampton, is an outstanding academic whose leadership in acoustical physics of bubbles has led to the development of new medical devices and procedures. His deep understanding of ultrasound and the collapse of bubbles led directly to novel tools for monitoring kidney stone dispersal and needle-free injection systems. Professor Layton's inventions for transmitting ultrasound downstreams of water have produced patented cleaning devices and most recently a wound healing device, all of which operate with just cold water and ultrasonics without soap, chemicals, or heating. Professor Timothy Layton. Professor Robert McLaren. Robert McLaren, Professor of Ophthalmology at the University of Oxford, is an outstanding, internationally recognized clinician scientist. He has undertaken pioneering research dedicated to finding new treatments, particularly using stem cell-based approaches, gene therapy, and electronic retinas for patients with incurable retinal diseases. He has been able to successfully link academia, industry, and the NHS through his work with Retina Implant AG in Germany. This led to the successful implantation of the first electronic retina in the UK and the world's first robotic eye operation in Oxford. Professor McLaren has also set up a gene therapy trials internationally in Canada, the USA, and Germany. Professor Robert McLaren. Professor Margaret McLean. Professor of Pulmonary Pharmacology at the University of Glasgow, Mandy McLean is distinguished for her research on the pathogenesis and treatment of pulmonary arterial hypertension. She is regarded as an international expert in this field and is one of the very few basic science researchers that regularly contribute to the triennial workshops hosted by the WHO. 60 to 80% of PAH patients are female, and Professor McLean identified the estrogen metabolizing enzyme CYP1B1 as a novel target for the treatment of PAH. She also characterized 4 novel models of serotonin and estrogen-dependent PAH that mimic the development of pulmonary hypertension only in females. Professor Margaret McLean. Professor Keith Matthews. Professor of Parasite Biology at the University of Edinburgh, Keith Matthews has pioneered understanding of the transmission biology of African trypanosomes, parasites that cause human African sleeping sickness, as well as widespread livestock disease throughout sub-Saharan Africa. His work integrates parasite biology, molecular and cellular biology, and has led to fundamental breakthroughs in our understanding of the molecular mechanisms that control trypanosome transmission and virulence. These findings have wide relevance across a broad range of protozoan pathogens, where cell-cell communication and environmental sensing processes are emerging as important contributors to the dynamics of infection and disease transmission. Professor Keith Matthews. Professor Guy Thwaites. Guy Thwaites is Professor of Infectious Diseases at the University of Oxford and Director of the Wellcome Trust Major Overseas Research Programme in Vietnam. He has an outstanding international reputation as a physician microbiologist whose research has defined the management of globally important infectious diseases. Directing a multidisciplinary research program across Vietnam, Nepal, and Indonesia has placed him at the forefront of international academic leadership in infectious diseases and global health. Professor Thwaites founded the UK Clinical Infection Research Group, bringing together NHS infection specialists to address questions which mattered to them and their patients through clinical trials. Professor Guy Thwaites. Professor Martin Tobin. Martin Tobin is Professor of Genetic Epidemiology and Public Health at the University of Leicester. His research has defined the genetic variants associated with lung function and COPD, showing for the first time their relevance in drug repurposing and disease prediction. He established the first genetic study in UK Biobank. Among his contributions to genomics of other complex common diseases and traits are the development of widely used methods and breakthroughs in the understanding of blood pressure genetics. His outreach activities have promoted public understanding of risk and smoking cessation as part of a broad strategy to reduce smoking-related illnesses. Professor Martin Tobin. Dr. Sharon Tooze. Sharon Tooze, a group leader at the Francis Crick Institute, has made seminal contributions to the cell biology of vesicle trafficking and has been a pioneer contributor to the burgeoning field of autophagy. Her work has led the way in unraveling the molecular mechanisms of autophagy through identification of essential proteins and new positive and negative regulators. She is co-founder and co-chair of the Steering Committee of Autophagy UK. Dr. Tooze has been an effective mentor to numerous young investigators and was asked to participate in the EU-sponsored Libra career development programme aimed at achieving gender equality in academia. Dr. Sharon Tooze. Professor Matthew Hoptoff. Matthew Hoptoff is Professor of General Hospital Psychiatry at King's College London. He is an outstanding academic psychiatrist and a highly effective ambassador for psychiatry in medicine, law, and work. His work on the overlap between mental and physical health is widely recognised to be world-leading. His work on mental capacity and law has combined careful epidemiological designs with imaginative methodological approaches to ascertain mental capacity in clinical populations, providing the first systematic studies of their kind. This work has influenced the House of Lords scrutiny of the Mental Capacity Act. Professor Matthew Hoptoff. Professor Dame Margaret Whitehead. Margaret Whitehead is head of the World Health Organization Collaborating Centre for Policy Research on Social Determinants of Health at the University of Liverpool. The range of her work is unparalleled, covering the spectrum from ethics to action, and her seminal paper for WHO has been translated into 20 languages. Her empirical studies have elaborated the causes and consequences of social inequalities in health. Her policy research includes innovative evidence synthesis methods to evaluate the impact of health inequalities resulting from labour market and social welfare policies, health system reforms, and governments' policy responses to recession. Professor Dame Margaret Whitehead. Professor Dame Till Wykes. Till Wykes, Professor of Clinical Psychology and Rehabilitation at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Clinical Neuroscience, is one of Britain's most prominent clinical psychologists. Her work has concentrated on the difficult but highly important area of psychological treatment and rehabilitation of people with psychotic illness. Her discovery of the links between cognition and recovery in people with schizophrenia led to her development of a novel intervention, cognitive remediation therapy. This therapy, used across the world, is the focus of further development in multinational studies and in applications for the NHS. Professor Dame Till Wykes.
Well, as we draw to a close for this part of the afternoon, can I just say that we're honoured to welcome these new fellows into the Academy, and we look forward to working with them and them playing an active part in our affairs. Can I also thank Philippa and Russell for overseeing a terrific election process and doing a brilliant job this afternoon. Could we give Philippa a vote of thanks?